To 1.3, comparing two objects. This is a qualitative look at two things at the same time: stand, walk, and run. First, let's talk about some terminology. XT stands for the position or distance versus time graph. You're going to be given this. Then you're going to use your slopometer, that handy dandy popsicle stick, to draw the VT or velocity versus time graph and the AT, acceleration versus time graph. Once you've drawn those two graphs, now you can read the graphs and identify the SP or starting position. That's the vertical intercept. The DIR or direction, the SV, starting velocity, and the do. What is the object doing? Stand, walk, run, speed up, or run, slow down. So let's look at stand. This is an XT graph for stand. Andy is standing. An object standing still will be a flat xt. The object does not move, so the velocity and the acceleration would both be 0. The velocity would be 0 and the acceleration would be 0. Let's look at those other 4 identifiable factors. The starting position of Andy is positive. The direction is negative. The starting velocity is 0, and he is standing. The do is standing. This would be an analysis of standing. This would be an XT graph of Andy walking. An object walking will be an angled XT. The object moves, so the velocity will be constant, but the acceleration will be 0. Velocity of constant, acceleration of 0. Those 4 things to identify again. This starting position of Andy would be 0. He's moving in a positive direction. He has a positive velocity because the line is angling up from left to right. And he is walking. Finally, let's look at run. Andy is running. An object running will be of curved xt. The object is changing velocity, so the velocity will be angled, but the acceleration will be flat. This would be Andy's angled velocity. Notice if you put your handy dandy slopometer, lining it up here starts at 0, and here is a high positive. So we draw 0 to positive. His AT would be positive because this line angles up from left to right, being a positive slope. The identifying factors: Andy started at a position of 0. He went in a positive direction. His starting velocity was 0, and he is running, speeding up. So now it's activity time. 2 players at a time are going to be shown a card with a description with an XT graph of 2 people, Andy and Brian. And there are signs for you to wear for Andy and Brian. Your job as the player is to act out what is on the card. Your job as the class is to draw the XT graph of what you see, standing, walking, or running. Kind of like charades. You're going to draw these XT graphs on a whiteboard, and we're going to do this in the Commons. Welcome back. After the activity, now let's go over several of the problems that you saw during the activity and do a qualitative analysis of them. This is what you will be doing on the assignment of 1.3a. So qualitative analysis. Remember that when you're comparing 2 objects, qualitatively you must draw the VT graph, draw an AT graph, identify the starting position, that will be SP, identify the direction it is going, DIR, identify the starting velocity, SV, and identify what each object is doing, DO. So here's activity number 2 that you saw earlier. Andy is standing still, Brian is walking, right? So their VT graphs, Andy would be 0, Brian would be positive. And their AT graphs, Andy and Brian would both be graphed on the t-axis at 0 because the slopes of their VT graphs are both 0. Their qualitative characteristics, Andy started at a positive position, went in no direction. Starting velocity was 0, and he's standing. Brian started at a positive or 0 position. He went in a positive direction. His starting velocity was positive, and he is walking. In activity number 5, you saw hopefully something that looked like this, where Andy has a starting positive position. He goes in no direction at all. His starting velocity is 0, and he's standing still. But Brian started at a positive position, went in a negative direction. His starting velocity was 0. Sorry about that typo. And he is running, speeding up. Brian is running, speeding up. And you can see their VT graphs. Brian went from 0 to negative, so we drew 0 to negative. And then Brian has a negative AT graph. Let's look at another one. This was activity number 7, or card number 7. Okay? Where Andy started at a 0 position, went in a positive direction. His starting velocity was positive, and he's walking. Brian started at a positive position, went in a negative direction. His starting velocity was negative, and he is walking. This was hopefully Andy and Brian walking toward each other. Notice that Andy's VT is positive and Brian's VT is negative, but both of their ATs are 0. All right, so you're not going to do just those 11 problems. Let's look at some new problems. First of all, we're going to hand out 1.3a, comparing objects, and you need to label your paper, okay? Because your paper is going to look at Peter and Quentin. Then we'll look at one more example from your assignment. So, number 1, label it as P and Q, Q being the flat line. Number 2, P goes up and Q goes down. Number 3, P goes up and Q goes down. Number 4, P is the curve and Q goes down. Number 5, P is the curve and Q is the line going down. And finally, number 6, P is the curve from the top, Q is the curve from the bottom. So let's do number 5 together. Using your handy dandy slopometer, let's tackle one person at a time. So let's look at Peter, the red curve. Peter starts out at 0 velocity and goes to a positive velocity. So we drew 0 to positive for Peter. Peter's velocity time graph has a positive slope, so we draw a positive VT graph. Quentin, come back up here and grab Quentin. Quentin has a negative slope the whole time, so we have a negative graph on our VT. The slope of that VT is 0 for Quentin, so we draw 0. Looking at those 4 indicators, Peter started at a 0 position, went in a positive direction. His starting velocity was 0, and he is running, speeding up. Quentin started at a positive position, went in a negative direction. His starting velocity was negative, and he is walking. Well, I hope this helps on a look at qualitative analysis of comparing 2 objects. Good luck. Thanks for watching.